Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, my guest does something very interesting. Now, let me start by saying threats to your personal safety from random physical attacks, terrorists, and deranged individuals exist everywhere. In addition, online attacks in the form of scams, phishing attempts, and ransomware threaten your identity and financial assets. Now, my guest today, Pete Canavan, was a former radio show host and a personal safety expert, and he's made it his mission to improve personal safety. His extensive experience as an IT security consultant, self-defense instructor, and public safety professional allow him to provide practical, actionable solutions to today's threats. I want to welcome to my show Pete Canavan.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Appreciate being here, and hope to share some good information with you and your listeners.
Yeah. You know, Peter, everybody knows right now, particularly since 9/11, that there have been so many occurrences of attacks and terrorist situations. Now, I want you to discuss with our audience what it is that has changed, because maybe I'm wrong about this, but before 9/11, I didn't realize that there was terrorism. I mean, it just like is a word that popped up after 9/11. What do you have to say about that?
I think what changed is that it was easy for us in the United States to sort of ignore what was going on in the rest of the world because it didn't directly affect us, perhaps unless we were traveling. But 9/11 showed us that, guess what? Terror attacks can hit us here at home, and that sort of, I think, was the wake-up call that maybe we as a nation needed. And so, good or bad, things really haven't, sort of gotten, to the point where we've had, sort of another 9/11 type attack. But we see a lot of these smaller things that occur now with alarming frequency. And, from, active shooters and lone wolf type things, such as the thing that happened in Las Vegas at the concert,
yeah,
or whether it's some of these school shootings, the physical side of personal safety sort of was on the back burner. And I think a lot more people now are aware that they need to, sort of prepare for something, unfortunately.
Yeah. You say that the time to prepare is before the need arises. But, when people say that to me, they say, look around. You're at an airport, and they say, if you see something suspicious, tell us, inform us, and that sort of thing. But what does it mean to prepare? What suggestions would you have for the public about preparation before terrorist acts and things of that nature?
Well, there are really two sides to personal safety today. There is the offline personal safety concerns, and then we, of course, have now many online safety concerns. So what I tell people is you need to really take a look at where you are, both online and offline, and determine ahead of time, what sort of threats could there be to me, say, when I'm going on vacation this summer? Where am I going to be? What potential threats exist around me? And it may be from a person, but it could also be from nature, for example, flash flooding or wildfires. These things, people don't think about it until it affects them and they're being told they've got to evacuate, for example, because there's a wildfire over the next, mountain and the wind shifted and now it's coming your way. So now all of a sudden people panic. Yeah. So I think knowing the threats is definitely step number one. And then number two is just to have a plan to know, well, if this occurs, then I know I'm going to take action to do X, Y, and Z.
Right. Many years ago, and I'm going to it's a little bit of an apples and orange situation, but I am going to address this because I think it's really important. Years ago when Janet Reno left the Clinton administration, everybody was gone after he, of course, served his term. They asked her, and that is the news, they said to her, well, what are you going to do next, Miss Reno? And her answer was, I'm going to work on issues of cyber terrorism. Now, cyber terrorism, I want you to give our audience, if you can, a definition of cyber terrorism. What does that mean?
Well, we all know what normal terrorism is, if you could call it that. But cyber terrorism can evolve and really extend into a lot of other areas, such as involving people politically. There could be economic motivation for hacking or terrorizing people by both individuals and groups. Now, the purpose could be to cause economic damage. It could be to cause physical damage. It could include the sending out of, for example, electronic communications that includes misleading information. It includes creating websites for purposes such as spreading ideologies or propaganda. So there's a wide range of things that sort of fall under the umbrella of cyber terrorism. But primarily, the end result is the same. It's to spread terror or misinformation or confusion among the masses.
Yeah. Now, technology has expanded, exponentially. It's everybody uses some form of technology, including little kids, which is really a fascinating thing to see them on airplanes, for example, playing with little iPads and, really getting involved in this. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about, and maybe if you don't know about it, then please tell me. But if you do know something about this, I'd like you to tell our audience, too, that today, because of all the different electronic devices that we have, for example, the military has developed a cyber command, and they've done it because obviously there's a lot of problems. Now, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, technology has certainly infiltrated every aspect of our lives, of our children's lives, of everybody's lives. You really can't get away from it. And I think our military recognizes the fact that we are very vulnerable because, for example, what I was just talking about a minute ago, the spread of information as well as misinformation can really cause panic, depending on what the content of that information is. Also, we have foreign actors that are able to infiltrate our systems, our electronic systems, and cause damage to it, whether it's doing damage to our electrical grid, whether it's doing damage to our financial institutions. I mean, think for a minute how unbelievably petrified people would be if they went and checked their bank balance at the ATM today and found out that it was zero. And all of a sudden it would be like, well, I know I have money in there. What's going on? And all of a sudden it was like, hey, you call your friend and they say, yeah, I just noted the same thing. And you call somebody else and, yeah, same thing happened to me. And now all of a sudden you realize we got a major problem. We're under some sort of cyber attack. And really thwarting that is very, very difficult to do.
I hear you. Now, set the stage for me for a second and put yourself on stage, okay? I'm using that word stage 2 times. Put yourself on stage and let us know if you were giving a talk to a group of people. It doesn't matter, hundreds of people, just maybe even thousands of people. What would you say is the major thing that you want to talk about with regard to what you do?
Well, I would say that you need to understand that personal safety is your individual responsibility, that saying you don't understand something or don't believe it's going to happen to you is no excuse, that you need to really understand that simply by knowing what sort of threats exist that can put you at risk can go a long way toward you being able to protect yourself from those threats. And I'm talking, both in the online world as well as the physical world.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest problem. People are complacent. They're comfortable. We all have our comfort zones. We all have our routines. And that is really our Achilles heel. You walk your dog down the same street every day, you expect it to be the same. You go to the supermarket every day, you expect it to be the same, et cetera. So that's probably our biggest problem, and we need to understand that we need to be more aware of threats that exist.
Yeah. Now, again, have you ever written a book that addresses these subjects? Because I'm sure there are plenty out there, but you know so much about this subject. It would seem to me that it would be very important to put out a book so there are people in schools, people just like me, having an understanding of what you say is our responsibility.
The latest book that I wrote, The Ultimate Guide to College Safety, is all about protecting yourself from online and offline threats. It was targeted towards the college audience. It just came out this past September. But the information in the book is entirely relevant to many people. And so what I'm planning on doing is writing additional books to speak to specific audiences, such as seniors, such as people in other levels of education, the K-12 market, because the things that we all need to be aware of really don't single out any one segment of the population. So a general book, I think, could be a good idea. The problem is with that approach, people may think, well, maybe it's not applicable to me. So I'm trying to really speak more to specific audiences, and, I've got half a dozen more books up in my head I want to write. So.
Yeah, no, it sounds fantastic, and I'm sure it's going to be very successful because you're right. You got to start when they're young so that they have that sense of what is going on. And they're pretty sophisticated kids today, so, it's kind of interesting that you would give them all this information. And they probably, the interesting thing is once they know it, they can introduce it to their parents, which would be very important. Now, let's talk about
I'm going to be speaking to a group this summer at a summer camp, and their kids range from 4 to about 14. And I'm going to be going there and doing a couple of safety workshops for them and, just introduce certain concepts.
Fantastic. What about drones? What do you think of drones, and what's the danger having drones all over the place now?
That's a slippery slope. I was just outside and on my street with my neighbors about a week ago,
right,
and one came flying overhead. And we all just kind of looked at each other and were like, what is that doing there? Why is that there? And it was just hovering, and we didn't know, is it looking at us? Is it, what's it doing? And so it's an invasion of privacy, I think.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, now, another thing I want you to do for a second is if you were in front of Congress, for example, you decided that there's so much going on that is dangerous and people are getting really weary of hearing, all these things and then saying to themselves, I've got to be responsible, I've got to take care of myself, I have to be sensitive to totally all these different things. Put yourself in Congress. I want to know what Peter Canavan would say to our Senate, would say to our Congress. What would you tell them about safety?
I would tell them that there needs to be a massive investment in education starting at the earliest levels, and there also needs to be an investment in the technologies that currently exist, as well as investment in technologies under development that can detect threats to our safety. And the problem, going back to the personal, the privacy issue rather, you've got this tightrope you got to walk, because after 9/11, as we were talking about a little bit ago, we were willing to give up certain privacy, that we were used to in the interest of safety. And so, people are willing to do that up to a point. But when it gets so intrusive that you feel you have no privacy, then, what are we here for? This is supposed to be America and the land of the free, and, we're supposed to be able to, do what we want, but, again, within reason.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. There's no question about it. Now, you're also involved in martial arts and self-defense. That is a kind of interesting thing as well. How'd you get involved in that? And what is is it useful for women, for men, for kids? What's the story about that?
I've been training in the martial arts for over 20 years. I got involved early on as a kid, as, many young boys, you get enamored with, seeing these really cool, fight scenes in movies and things. And, I dabbled a little bit in it, but I didn't get serious about it until my mid-20s. And I've been training every week since. So for a long time, I've been training it. And it's absolutely effective, not just for the physical self-defense part of it, which is obvious, but the other, things that you really can't put your finger on and say, but things like patience and fortitude and discipline and courage. And, there are a lot of other intrinsic values that benefit people who take that training. And, those are things that can help us in everyday life. I wrote an article for USA Today magazine last month, and I basically took all of these traits and said, okay, well, here's how you apply them in self-defense, but my sidebar was, here's how you apply those traits to everyday life in dealing with your wife, your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, et cetera.
Right. So when you did that and you got all that information out, were people asking you a lot of different questions? And if so, what kind of questions did they want to ask of you? I mean, because obviously those questions are very valuable because they mean something to a person, and knowing that they're asking them makes them, really, how would I put this, vulnerable to understanding that things can really go wrong.
Well, I think the biggest misconception that people have is that they need to spend a lot of time and a lot of money in personal self-defense training, physical self-defense training. That is not true. I've been training for a long time, and I've done workshops, and I've instilled skills in people in a very short period of time. We're talking, over the course of, half a day or a couple of days. And it all is, something that if you learn a few things well and you understand, really, I think the most important part, the mindset that is necessary that you have to have if you are put into a bad situation, or if a bad situation, erupts around you, you need to kind of go from, this nice, normal person that you are day in and day out to someone who becomes fierce. They have a warrior mindset. I do training on that as well, that tells, you basically get into this mindset that you are going to survive no matter what. You're going to go over, under, around, or through any obstacle that's going to stand in your way. If that's somebody standing between you and getting home to your family that night, well, you know what? There's no way you're getting in my way. And you have to kind of flip that switch. And that's a very important thing to have, because I could teach you all the skills in the world, but if you can't bring yourself to use them, it's useless.
Yeah. That's a good point. Now, there's something also that I want to talk about, and that is that, for example, I'm going to use Israel as an example, because in Israel, everybody, including men and women, have to go into the military. And during that time, and I've been told by people that they really develop a lot of skills that can really help them if, needless to say, there's any kind of attacks or any kind of terrorism. Now, how do you feel about that? Don't you think that in this country we would benefit, really big-time benefit, by having our young people after they graduate high school go into the military?
Given the state of the world today, I think it's an excellent idea, because you're developing many skills, not just those on, for example, how to shoot a gun or defend yourself physically, but you're also developing teamwork skills. You're developing relationship skills. You're developing leadership skills. And so I think it's a great idea. I applaud Israel for doing that, because they are way more prepared for a problem when it occurs. And we see it from time to time on the news, and, people know exactly what to do. And it goes back to my earlier point about preparation and needing to prepare before you have a need. If you're prepared for something and it happens, you know what to do. And it doesn't mean you're paranoid if you start thinking about these things. It simply means you're prepared. And if you're prepared for something, guess what? You are confident. And when your confidence level is higher, you exude that confidence to other people. And so if somebody's even thinking about maybe approaching you, but they sort of see how you carry yourself, for example, they may think twice, and look for an easier target. So it helps you in so many different ways, I believe.
I believe that as well, and I would hope that people in our government would see the need and would develop some kind of program that would encourage young people to enter the military. Now I'm going to switch a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to prepare in your home for any kind of situation that is really scary. There must be things that you think would be important to have in your home so that you can protect yourself and your family.
Well, you should have a plan for all different scenarios, whether there's a fire in your house or if there's a home invasion. If we're talking about the latter, you should know what you're going to sort of fall back to. You should have a safe room. You should have a door with secure locks on it. You should make sure that you always have a cell phone and charger in that room. For some people, they're not going to be comfortable with firearms in the home. But, you kind of should. But if you are not willing to do that, you've got to look at some alternatives. And so that means, have a room in your home that's a hardened room, that has a communications in it that, is not just like a regular landline where somebody could cut the line and now you can't make a call. But you can supply yourself with other things, that you have, flashlights and stun guns and pepper spray and other things that can protect yourself with. Obviously, against a bullet, it's not going to do a whole lot. So, I always encourage people to even the playing field. I'm an Act 235 lethal weapon certified professional in the state of Pennsylvania. That means that I've been trained in the use of using a lethal weapon for example, for employment. But I encourage everybody to at least familiarize themselves and their family and their children with all the options. And if that means you got to teach your kids about guns, that means teach your kids about guns.
Right. Well, that brings up, we could probably do a whole show on this, but it does bring up an important point, and that is the point about guns. There is such a lot of debate and such a lot of, I'm going to say people who want to really get rid of the NRA, and they want to say that having guns is absolutely terrible. Yesterday I had a conversation, and I'm going to share this with you and my audience, and that is that I had a conversation with some friends, and we talked about this issue of holding or having guns, and they brought out the point that in Australia they took away the guns, and since then there's been virtually no crime. Now, I met some people from Australia who actually said that's not true. So let's talk a little bit about how you feel about guns and how do you prepare yourself once you do have a gun. How do you deal with that? How do you operate? Where do you put the guns? All the scenarios that you think are relevant to this whole issue of guns and gun control.
Well, there are two main things. Number one, Australia has seen an increase in crime. If you take the guns away, guess from the people who are law-abiding citizens, the only people that are going to have them are the criminals. And so now the criminals know that the general public is unarmed. Now it's easy pickings. So that, to me, is an absurd idea. The second part of it is, abolishing the NRA and, attacking the Second Amendment. Well, I'm sorry, but the Second Amendment exists to protect the First. The First Amendment gives us the freedom of speech and the freedom, all these other freedoms that we hold dear that make this country great. And if we didn't have a way to protect ourselves and ensure those freedoms, they would be gone overnight. And so those are two things I just want to put out there because they're extremely important to understand. The other is that if you're not comfortable with a gun for whatever reason, and I've heard many different reasons from people over the years, that's okay. But at least educate yourself. And if you have some sort of interest, find someone who is a professional, who has been trained, go to some place that offers training so you're not scared of them. And I think that's the biggest problem is people are scared of them because they don't understand them. They think, why do I need this? Well, I'm sorry, but I want a level playing field. Okay? I have a carry permit. I've had a carry permit for 15 years. I leave my house, my gun's on me. Okay? That's because I have the right to carry it. I have the right to use it if my life is threatened, if the lives of my family are threatened. Other than that, nobody knows I've got it.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second and say to you that, and this is not really truly my opinion, but it's a question that I have because people talk to me all the time, and it turns out that we have discussions about guns, and boy, oh boy, is there fighting about that. So,
Sure.
Yeah, big time. So what do you feel about having, say, an AK-47, that sort of gun? Do you think people ought to have them, or is that, the kind of enigma that we're dealing with because you do believe in having a way to protect yourself with guns, but what about those kinds of guns?
A gun is a gun is a gun. The only difference between something that, for example, is like a military-grade weapon, which is, a fully automatic, and a civilian version, there's really not a whole lot of difference. It's not the gun. People want to sort of point to the AK-47 or some other, gun, the AR-15, and say, hey, this is a scary-looking gun. We don't need to have this gun. Well, that's ridiculous because there's a valid reason for owning any type of firearm. And so if we demonize a certain firearm, like an AR-15, as everybody is trying to do, well, now we just had a shooting recently that a shotgun was involved. So now what do? Now do you go ban every shotgun? Okay, now all the shotguns are gone. So now the next crime is done with a 9mm firearm handgun. Now what do? Ban all of those? So, you can't do that because once you go down that slope, eventually they're all gone. And so that's not the problem. The problem is not with the gun. The problem is with the person pulling the trigger. And this goes into a much bigger conversation about why that is. What's influencing the rise in violence? Is it video games? Is it society? Is it upbringing? Is it family life? There's a ton of reasons, and we could talk about it all day long because I've been in many a heated discussion with people about the reasons why we have so many problems in this country today. And it's not just people say, oh, it's, easy access to firearms. Well, if somebody knows there's a gun somewhere, there's a will, there's a way. They're going to break into a house and steal one. They're going to break into a gun store and get one. So, all mine are locked up. Everybody who is a responsible firearms owner should have them all locked up. If it's not on your person, it should be locked up in your gun safe.
Yeah.
But, some people don't.
Yeah, they're afraid. Guns, it's kind of like, how do we say this? When we were kids, and I think about the fact that, if particularly if you were a little kid, a boy, your parents would get you guns and, Western hats and Western clothes, and it was very innocent. Things have
Oh, yeah, the little Red Ryder BB guns and stuff, sure.
That's right. Now, today, we have kids killing people from rage, from different things they're facing. But, I like what you said because, yes, it seems to me that having a way to protect yourself is also psychological. When you have something and you feel confident that you can use it, you have this sense of security and a sense of, being safe. So
absolutely.
That's right. Now, I want you to tell our audience, because we just have another moment, you train the general public, students, businesses, law enforcement, security guards, public safety officers. The list goes on and on. So, again, last but not least, I'm going to give you the last word. Stand in front of a podium now in your imagination. And the first thing that you want to say to people after all the years that you've been, giving all this information to people, what is the first thing, and in this particular case we're going to make it the last thing, that you want to tell all these people that you give talks to?
What I would tell them is you need to take a long, hard look at your preparedness or lack of it in your job, in your home, and in your dealings with other people and in your travels. And understand that if you simply look at things with open eyes and without distractions and without falling into the comfort zones that we're all used to, you will be so much safer simply because you're more aware of the people, the places, and the objects around you. And so that's the takeaway. The takeaway is, go get educated, find someone who can give you whatever skills that you feel you're lacking in, whether it's somebody that helps you design a plan for defending your home or your self-defense training or martial arts or something like that. If you identify an area in your life that you're lacking that knowledge in, actively go find someone in your area that can assist you. Because, again, you're not being paranoid. You're simply preparing for something that could occur.
Great words. Great wisdom. Peter, if people want to get in touch with you and if they want you to be one of their speakers, how do they do that?
Best way is to go to my website, PeteCanavan.com. That's Pete, P-E-T-E, Canavan, as my dad said, a car can go up a hill, Canavan. So that's Pete, C-A-N-A-V, as in Victor, A-N, PeteCanavan.com. And then I have my college safety site, which is CampusSafetyUniversity.com, which is a free resource for the public to find out information about how to be safer at college. And it's an interactive site and contains a lot of good information for both for parents, students, and educators on personal safety issues.
Peter, what about your books?
The Ultimate Guide to College Safety is the most recent book. That is available in all major bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. The first book I wrote, if people are looking for a very good introductory guide to self-defense, is the Self-Defense Survival Guide. And that's over 200 photographs. When you purchase the book, you gain access to a website that contains videos of the techniques. So it's actually a kind of like a combo package. You get the book, you get all these pictures, and you also get a video, sort of online video companion to it. And that will teach you all kinds of stuff about how to physically keep yourself safer.
Yeah, Peter Canavan has been my guest today, and he addresses a variety of personal and public safety topics that are interesting and informative. He trains people. He really understands safety. And listen, one more time when you hear the show, see if there's something that you want to ask Pete, because Pete's got all the information. And buy his books. As he told you, they're on Amazon and they're at Barnes & Nobles, and each one is very valuable. So I want to thank Peter Canavan for being on the Susan Brender Show.
Thanks for having me, Susan. I'd love to be back, and I hope your audience has got a few good takeaways.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm sure they do.
Back in my day, to become an author, you had to master your craft. You needed a team that you could trust, a team that would never flinch in battle. Back in my day, you would risk losing your rights and pay outrageous amounts for terrible service. Well, yesterday is not today. Gladiator Publishing Company has a century-long reputation for defending writers and readers and winning awards for their record-setting low-cost services and market sales. They are 75 to 80% more cost-effective and never touch your royalties or copyrights. Go with a publisher that is so transparent that they have their contract on their webpage. Have your book treated with honesty, loyalty, and respect, period. Visit us at gladiatorpublishing.com or text us at 417-291-9162.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.